It seems you can't have a cutting-edge mid-sized SUV of any kind these days without having a plug-in hybrid version, so Ford continues to offer that tech with this improved version of its third generation Kuga crossover. EV driving range and tax-beating overall CO2 efficiency have been considerably improved with this updated model, which also gets a sharper look and a rejuvenated cabin. Plus it's much faster and can tow heavier loads. Worth a second look then. For years, a Ford Kuga was the mid-sized SUV crossover that other brands turned to if they were developing a car in this class and wanted it to be good to drive. The Mark 1 model was out on its own in this respect, but when in 2013 Ford had to make the second generation version slightly larger and heavier, they diluted a few of that original car's virtues in a manner not helped by the additional need to incorporate electric power steering. At its original launch back in 2020, Ford knew that this Mark III design had to do better, which was quite a brief for the company's engineers, because they knew this CX-482 design also had to be bigger and carry around quite a lot more weighty equipment. Still, you're always going to have an easier job producing exemplary drive dynamics if your SUV's broadly based on the market's best handling family hatch, in this case Ford's fourth generation Focus. This Mark III Kuga shares that car's stiffer, more sophisticated C2 platform and has the advantage that, unlike the Focus, humbler versions don't have to be saddled with a relatively crude torsion beam rear suspension setup. All Kugas get the proper all-round independent suspension arrangement that only features on the most powerful Focuses. On top of that, the steering column's twice as stiff as the pre-2020 era Mark II Kuga, and compared to that old car there's a 10% gain in torsional stiffness, a 44mm wider track and a 10mm lower centre of gravity. It all sounds quite promising. And so it proves. When we first tested this Mark III Kuga for you back in 2020, we reported that on the road this car feels like what it is, a slightly larger, slightly taller version of the Focus, and not much has changed with this updated model. The steering isn't perfect in terms of feedback, but it's quick and accurate and much better than the electrified rack that featured in the old Mark II design. The PHEV plug-in hybrid version that we're trying here isn't quite as sharp to drive as its stablemates. Blame an extra 250 kilograms of additional weight for that, but it's still a more entertaining steer than its segment rivals. Across the range there are things like torque steer compensation, a subtle stability control system and torque vectoring control to get the power down through the bends. It all combines to create a car that really can reward at the wheel, even in its most affordable forms. Perhaps especially in its most affordable forms. We'll get to that in a minute. Overall, there's nothing else in this segment that feels quite the same. Get out of one of these and go and drive a rival Volkswagen Tiguan or Peugeot 3008. We think you'll find that it'll feel a little dull by comparison. The ride of this Mark III design was improved too, thanks to an extra inch of suspension travel, taller profile tyres and a new isolated rear subframe. Unfortunately, you still can't have four-wheel drive on this still front-driven only PHEV variant. That's the one we've chosen to try today. But this model does now get a more powerful electric motor, taking total power to 243 PS, and a bigger 14.4 kilowatt-hour battery that now allows for a much longer EV driving range, almost 43 miles, though that's still some way off the kind of EV range figure you'd find in the best of this car's rivals. A Volkswagen Tiguan e-Hybrid, for instance, now manages up to 71 miles. To get close to Ford's quoted EV figure, you'll need to regularly boost brake regeneration energy harvesting by pressing the L button in the center of this circular gear controller. And of course, you'll need to get your head around all the different drive modes, which are all pretty much as previously. With all Kugas, there are normal, sport, eco and slippery settings, and this PHEV version adds 3 further settings for the electric drivetrain. That's EV Now, which focuses the drivetrain on all-electric output, and EV Later, which holds the current state of charge so that you can save it for urban driving that you might want to do later in your trip. Most of the time though, you'll simply leave the car in EV Auto, where clever electronics determine the most efficient use of engine and battery power. So much about the driving characteristics of this car remains as it was before, but there are significant drive differences as part of this update. Thrashing around for a unique Kuga selling point, Ford has seized upon towing capability, re-engineering hybrid and PHEV versions of this car to tow up to 2,100 kilograms, a best-in-class figure. For reference, a Volkswagen Tiguan can tow up to 2,000 kilograms, Kia Sportage just 1,500 kilograms. Special sat-nav functionality allows owners to enter the dimensions of their car and trailer, then the software will plan a route, avoiding low bridges and tight corners. Neat. As is the rather unique ability via the centre screen to monitor the frugality of your Kuga whilst it's hitched up. Off-road ability has been enhanced too. Well, it has if you opt for the new Active variant, which has a ride height raised by 10mm at the front and 5mm at the rear. This version also gains an extra trail driving mode, which optimises traction control and throttle response for progress on different surfaces. Obviously, the ultimate Kuga option in terms of efficiency is this plug-in hybrid 2.5 Duratec PHEV version, which records an official combined fuel figure of up to 313.9 mpg and a WLTP rated CO2 reading of up to 21 grams per kilometre. The visual changes go a little further than the usual facelift wash and brush up, and this heavily updated version of the 3rd generation Kuga design gets a much sharper look than the original. Arguably of greater significance, though, are the updates made inside. Can this updated model's cabin reflect Ford's desire for a small but subtle move-up market? Because the architecture of this dash still has to be shared with an ordinary Focus family hatch, that's a big ask. But Ford's cabin design team have done their best to embellish it. If you're familiar with the original version of this Mark III model, then you'll immediately notice this updated design's much larger and considerably cleverer 13.2-inch Sync 4 center touchscreen, though it's not so good that all the climate controls, bar the windscreen demister, now have to sit upon it. That demister's function button now sits alongside the switchgear that was previously on the center console for the rear view camera and the drive modes, which has freed up space for an extra center console cubby. The 12.3-inch digital instrument display that you view through the wheel is also new, as before featuring graphics that change with the selected drive mode. As before, there's plenty of cabin storage provision, and you sit satisfyingly high behind the wheel on supportive AGR certified sports seats that come smartly upholstered in Sensico faux leather with neo suede inserts and red stitching. Right, let's take a look at rear passenger space. The big news at the original launch of this Mark III Kuga lay with the installation for the first time of a sliding rear bench incorporated as a result of customer feedback. As before, it slides over a range of 150mm, is 60-40 split, and with both sections fully back, rear occupants can enjoy a best-in-class legroom figure of 1035mm. These side squab mounted levers allow the seat backs to recline as well for greater comfort on longer journeys, though the headrests are of the sort that uncomfortably dig into the back of your neck until they're raised. Even if the need for boot capacity means that you have to push this bench right forward, recessed seat backs ahead still provide for decent knee room. Let's finish with a look out back. Once the tailgates raised, a very decently sized boot with a low loading lip is revealed, square in shape with little wheel arch intrusion. It's 475 litres in size with conventional variants, though that figure falls to 411 litres with this PHEV model. That's with the sliding rear bench pushed right back towards the rear like this. Slide it forward as far as it will go and your capacity rises to as much as 645 litres or 581 litres for this plug-in version. You retract the seat backs using these rather flimsy cargo sidewall catches, and when the seats eventually spring forward, they don't fold completely flat. Total capacity to the window line is rated at 1,534 litres or 1,481 litres in this PHEV model. Those figures fall to 1,478 litres and 1,423 litres respectively if you fitted the Mini spare. Adding the weight and complexity of a PHEV system doesn't do the Kuga any favours in terms of either its handling or its price positioning. Ford, though, is hoping that target market customers will think these drawbacks an acceptable trade for the not inconsiderable benefit of being able to slash taxation payments and being able to conduct almost exclusively electrified mileage, which this car does even more impressively in this smartly improved form. This car's growing array of mid-sized SUV plug-in rivals all have much the same appeal, of course, but this Kuga should feel a more interesting steer than any of them, despite its near 1.9-tonne curb weight, which is important. Just because your next family car might need to be in some way electric, it doesn't have to feel like some kind of domestic appliance. Ford knows how to create something better, and it shows with this car.